In the fall of 1854, 32 people vanished from the winding roads outside Cold Spring, New York, and not a single body was ever recovered. The sheriff blamed wolves, the coroner blamed river floods, the papers whispered about highwaymen, but the town elders, especially those with gray in their beards and secrets in their eyes, knew better. Each of those missing souls had last been seen heading toward the old Berringer mill on Quarry Hollow Road, where the great water wheel turned day and night, grinding, always grinding, long after the grain shipments stopped. The mill was the beating heart of Cold Spring's economy. Since 1831, it had produced the finest flour in Putnam County, feeding families from Westchester to Poughkeepsie. It stood alone at the base of a narrow gorge where the Hudson's tributary, Breakneck Brook, twisted like a blade. The mill's great wheel, nearly 20 feet across, was said to hum like a church organ when the stones were engaged, and they were always engaged. Before we descend into tonight's horrifying tale, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your state or country in the comments. I'm always amazed to see how far these forgotten histories travel. And if you're the kind of person who's drawn to dark truths, chilling mysteries, and stories hidden beneath the surface of history, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We uncover horrors the textbooks leave out. And trust me, what you're about to hear is not in any schoolbook. Locals used to joke you could set your clocks to the grinding of the Berringer stones, but over time, the laughter faded. Something about that sound began to feel wrong, too constant, too urgent, as if it were grinding not grain, but time itself. And yet, no one dared question the Berringer brothers, whose family had built the mill and buried half their ancestors beneath it. Otto and Frederick Berringer were not what you'd call sociable. Otto, the elder by 10 years, was massive, stern, and unblinking, a man of ledgers, contracts, and debt collection. Frederick was thin, twitchy, and spoke in murmurs. A mechanical genius, they said, built a new gear system with no formal training, reconfigured the mill's hopper with nothing but a sketch and a pocket knife. He hadn't left the mill in over 3 years. Some said he couldn't. That autumn, just before the leaves turned to flame and ash, young Nutha, Neil Rourke, made a discovery on the trail near Breakneck Brook, something half buried in dust and husks, something human, something missing a name but not a story. That's when the whispers returned. And that's when the people of Cold Spring began to realize the grinding hadn't stopped because there was no grain. It hadn't stopped because there was something else to grind. Nathaniel Rourke had only meant to catch fish that morning. The sun had just crested the ridgeline over Cold Spring, painting the leaves gold along Breakneck Brook. Rourke, 15 and eager to prove he could handle a full trapline alone, followed the water's bend with a pole in one hand and a rusted tin pail in the other. When he saw the thing tangled in roots below the trail, he thought it was an animal carcass, until he got closer. It was a shoe, a man's boot, black leather, crusted with flour, the kind peddlers wore, still laced tight to a foot, mottled and pale. Nathaniel ran all the way back to town, his screams echoing through the trees. By noon, Sheriff Amos Whitlock and 2 deputies stood by that same brook, examining what they now confirmed was a partial human leg, severed cleanly above the ankle as though by machinery. There were no signs of tearing, no tooth marks, no blood, only that fine white powder dusting everything. Flour. Fresh ground. The boot's make was traced to a traveling tinsmith named Louis Finch, last seen in Cold Spring 5 days prior. He'd stopped at the inn, sold a few wares, and told the barkeep he was heading to the Berringer mill to hawk some axle grease. Said the gears there ran hot. Might be a sale. The barkeep recounted. God help him. Sheriff Whitlock rode out to the Berringer mill that afternoon, not expecting to find much. Accidents happened after all. Wild animals scavenged. But what struck him wasn't what he found. It was what he didn't. There was no smell, no rot, no birds circling above. Just the steady thump of the water wheel and that ever-present grind of the millstones echoing through the narrow gorge like a heartbeat. Otto Berringer stood on the porch when Whitlock arrived, his massive arms crossed, coat dusty with flour. "Something I can help you with, Sheriff?" he asked without moving. Whitlock explained about the leg, about the missing peddler. Otto didn't flinch. "Men go missing on these roads all the time. Thieves, bears, the river takes what it wants." "I'll need to take a look inside," Whitlock said. "You can look all you want," Otto replied, "but you won't find anything you're looking for." The sheriff would later swear the stones got louder as he crossed the threshold, and he was right. They always did when they were hungry. Inside the Berringer mill, the air was heavy, not just with flour dust, but with something else. Sheriff Whitlock couldn't name it at first. It wasn't rot, not mold, not quite metallic either. It was the smell of something ground too finely to recognize, something that should not be airborne. The building rose 4 stories, each floor packed with ancient timber beams and humming with iron mechanisms. Gears the size of wagon wheels turned with measured rhythm. Leather belts looped overhead like snakes in procession, shuttling motion from a boyhood, kell to axle. The grinding stones, imported French burstone, revolved in their cradles, even though the feed hoppers above them were empty. "Why are they running with no grain?" Whitlock asked. Frederick Berringer emerged from the shadows, hands greasy with tallow, eyes twitching from the machines to the sheriff and back again. "Keeping the teeth sharp," he muttered. "Idle stones grow dull, dull stones chip, chips ruin flour. And people disappear," Whitlock added. Frederick blinked like he'd been slapped. "They come and go." Otto spoke from the stairwell above. "We make the best flour this side of the Hudson, Sheriff. No one's ever gotten sick from it. No rodents, no mold, and no complaints until now." "That's not what I'm here about." Otto descended slowly, every step creaking beneath his weight. "Then what are you here for?" "Just answers," Whitlock said. "Finch's boot was found by the creek, severed clean, not chewed, not torn, and covered in your flour." Otto's face didn't change, but the air seemed to tighten around him. "Machines have accidents," he said. "So do trespassers." Frederick's hands were trembling. "He shouldn't have come in," he whispered. The sheriff turned slowly to look at him. "Are you saying he did?" Frederick bit his lip, glancing toward the stairs. "I'm saying the wheel doesn't stop turning, not even for the curious. The system must stay in motion." Whitlock stepped closer. "What system?" Frederick opened his mouth, but Otto's voice cut across the space like a blade. "Enough." They stared at each other for a long time, one man with law, the other with secrets. Then Whitlock turned to leave, brushing past flour sacks stacked shoulder-high by the door. It wasn't until he returned to town that he noticed the footprints in the flour had been wrong. They hadn't led in a straight line. They'd circled the mill, as if pacing. Word spread quickly in Cold Spring after Whitlock's visit to the mill. People were already uneasy from the string of disappearances, but now they had a name, Berringer, and a location. The mill where the stones never stopped. 2 days later, another person went missing. Margaret Linley, a midwife from Garrison, had been walking back from a birthing call. She took the riverside trail that ran near the gorge, a shortcut she'd used for years. Her apron was found at sunrise, hanging from a thorn bush, dusted with flour so fine it left no trace on the wind. No blood, no struggle, no prints. By week's end, 5 more were gone. A teacher, a boatman, a pair of traveling musicians, and an 11-year-old girl who'd gone to pick blackberries. No bodies, only their belongings, each one coated in the same pale residue. Panic took hold. Farmers refused to bring their grain to the mill. Bakers shut their ovens. Reverend Whitmore called for 3 days of fasting and prayer. but the church pews sat mostly empty. People were afraid to leave their homes, especially after sunset. The stone paths of Cold Spring were silent at night, lanterns dark, shutters locked tight. But still the Berringer mill turned. Some said they heard it from miles away now, louder than before, the sound deeper, more insistent, like it was calling. Sheriff Whitlock gathered a posse of 6 men and returned to the mill under cover of night, armed, cautious, prepared to search every floor and corner. But when they arrived, the wheel had stopped. The mill was silent. Inside, they found the place clean. Too clean. No sacks, no crates, no flour dust on the floor. As if the mill had been reset. Frederick was nowhere to be found. Otto stood alone in the office upstairs, calmly reading a Bible with pages stained from flour and oil. When Whitlock asked where his brother was, Otto only shrugged. "Machines break sometimes," he said. So do people." The sheriff had his men search the property. They found nothing. No signs of struggle, no trail, no grave. Just empty rooms and silent stones. Until Deputy Irons pulled back a tarp near the basement hatch. Beneath it, they found something cold and mechanical, a steel winch system with hooks and pulleys, and scattered around it, lengths of thick canvas, stained dark. The discovery of the winch changed everything. Sheriff Whitlock stood over it for a long time, staring at the rust-specked hooks dangling from the steel frame. They were spaced evenly, bolted into a beam that extended over the basement hatch. Beneath them, the wooden floor was deeply gouged, parallel scrapes that suggested weight, movement, repetition. Something had been lifted here. Again and again. "Could be for grain sacks," Deputy Irons offered, though his voice held no conviction. "Then why the canvas?" Whitlock murmured, pointing to the stained bundles on the ground. He crouched and touched one. It flaked. Not blood. Too old, too dry. But something dark had soaked into the fibers. And why hide it under a tarp? One of the men, Ezra Mallory, a retired cooper, crossed himself. The sheriff had the canvas gathered and carted back to town. He wanted it examined, though who could truly make sense of something like this was beyond him. The posse departed before dawn, leaving Otto Berringer alone in his mill. He never said a word as they left. Back in Cold Spring, panic turned to outrage. Whitlock gave a public statement but offered no arrests, no formal charges, only vague talk of an ongoing investigation. That wasn't enough. That night, a group of townsmen gathered in secret at Winslow's Tavern. They wanted the mill shut down. Some even wanted it burned. "It's a curse on this valley," someone muttered. "We should have salted the place 20 years ago." Others weren't so certain. The Berringer flour was still unmatched, and without the mill, what would Cold Spring's economy run on? Some refused to believe anything sinister could come from Otto, even less from Frederick. "Odd doesn't make you guilty," old Reverend Whitmore said. "And strange doesn't mean damned." But then came the noise. That very night, a sound rumbled through the valley, low, mechanical, distant but distinct. Whitlock, already awake with unease, stepped outside his home and froze. The millstones were running again. He could hear them, clear as a bell, though the air was still, and the water wheel had not turned in over 12 hours. Worse yet, the sound came not just from the gorge, but from beneath his feet, like something deep underground was grinding, chewing, processing. When he turned back toward the woods, he saw them, 3 wagons, canvas-covered, headed toward the Berringer mill. None of them bore lanterns. Sheriff Whitlock did not sleep that night. He sat on his porch, rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the black line of the treetops. The sound of the millstones never faded. If anything, it grew stronger, more deliberate. He could swear he felt it now, a subtle tremor in the earth, like the heartbeat of something massive and buried. The next morning, he returned to the Berringer mill alone. The air was sharp with frost, the trees brittle with late October death. The wheel was moving again, slow and deliberate, though Breakneck Brook was lower than it had been all month. That wasn't possible. The water shouldn't be enough to turn the mechanism. And yet, it spun, groaning against the chill. The front doors of the mill were open. Whitlock stepped inside, boots crunching over a thin film of fresh flour. He called out for Otto. No answer. He climbed the staircase to the office, found the Bible still resting on the desk, now open to the book of Ecclesiastes. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven. Below, the stones ground on. It was then he noticed the ledger. Otto's handwriting was crisp, angular, exacting. The sheriff had seen it before in tax records and grain invoices. But this was different. These were not sales, not weights of wheat or corn. These were names. Dozens of them, lined up with dates. Many were recent, some were not. Beside each name was a single column, processed or rejected. Whitlock flipped back through the pages. The names went back years, decades even. Some were marked with a small symbol, a triangle drawn in ink. He did not know what it meant. But he knew this. These were not business records. This was something else, a log of something far darker. As he stood, he felt a sudden gust of cold air rush up from beneath the floorboards. Not wind, not natural. It smelled faintly of iron and rot masked beneath the heavy scent of ground grain. Then he heard it, beneath the stones, a creak, a dragging sound, and a voice, low, muffled, repeating, "We feed, we feed, we feed." Whitlock fled the mill, stumbling through the brush, and swore never to return. But by nightfall, 2 more townspeople were gone. The next disappearances shattered whatever illusion of normalcy Cold Spring had left. Mary Ruth Penrose, a widow who lived alone near the orchard grove, vanished without a sound. Her front door was found ajar, her supper untouched, her Bible open on the table. But the real horror lay outside. Flour, white as snowfall, coated her garden path in a trail that led nowhere. It simply stopped in the middle of the yard, as though the air had swallowed her. Then came Caleb Owens, a hired hand known for his brute strength and suspicious nature. He'd been seen sharpening an axe on his porch the night before, muttering that he'd cut down the mill if the sheriff wouldn't. At sunrise, the axe lay on the steps. Caleb was gone. The only sign of his passing was a handprint pressed into his door frame, made of flour and far too large to be his own. Sheriff Whitlock, now desperate, took his case to the county magistrate in Carmel. He arrived pale and shaking, clutching the ledger he'd stolen from the mill. The judge, a hard-faced man named Alton Crane, listened with increasing skepticism. "You're suggesting," he said at last, "that a flour mill is consuming people?" "I'm suggesting that something inside it is," Whitlock replied. The judge leaned back. "You've got names in a book. That's not evidence." Whitlock opened his mouth to argue, but then hesitated. What could he really prove? That flour covered the belongings of the dead? That the stones ran when there was no grain? That he'd felt the earth vibrate? Crane finally agreed to send 2 men, a state investigator and a forensic physician, to inspect the mill. They would arrive in 4 days. 4 days too late. Back in Cold Spring, the townspeople had started locking their doors at all hours. Parents kept children inside. Tradesmen refused to make deliveries to the Berringer property. Reverend Whitmore attempted to rally the town with prayer, but only a handful came, and all of them sat near the exits. And still the millstones ground on, every night, without grain, without rest. The sound had changed. What had once been rhythmic and steady now pulsed, faster, hungrier, as if something inside the stones had found a new appetite, a deeper purpose. And through it all, Otto Berringer remained unseen. Some claimed he had died. Others whispered he was no longer a man at all. The two investigators from Carmel arrived on the morning of November 2nd. Dr. Luther Givens, a meticulous man with a thin mustache and a sharper tongue, represented the state medical board. His companion, Inspector Horace Lee, was younger but already weary-eyed, a former Pinkerton agent who'd seen his share of frauds and charlatans. Both had come expecting exaggeration, rural hysteria stirred by isolation, grief, and superstition. Sheriff Whitlock met them at the edge of town. He was gaunt, unshaven, eyes rimmed in red. He gave no pleasantries, offered no tours. "There's no time," he said. "It's awake now." Givens raised a brow. "It?" Whitlock didn't answer. They reached the mill just past noon. The water wheel turned slowly, despite Breakneck Brook being little more than a trickle. The sheriff glanced at the stream bed and muttered, "It's pulling from somewhere else now." Lee stepped inside first, revolver drawn. Givens followed, notebook in hand, already sketching the layout. The air inside was thick, hotter than it should have been for the season, almost humid. Flour dust clung to every surface, swirling in shafts of light like fog. Then the stones began to turn. Neither man had touched the controls. "Who activated the mechanism?" Givens demanded. "No one," Whitlock whispered. "They haven't stopped in weeks." Lee descended to the basement alone. He was gone nearly 20 minutes. When he came back up, he was visibly shaken. He said only 3 words. "Call the army." Dr. Givens refused to leave without documenting everything. He opened the grain hopper, expecting it to be empty. It was not. What fell out was not wheat. Long, gray strands, threaded with blood. Hair. Givens dropped his notebook. He backed away from the millstone, but not before noticing something else. Scratches, etched deep into the base of the runner stone. Not machine markings. Letters, names, 48 of them. He turned to Whitlock. "This isn't just a crime scene," he said. "This is a slaughterhouse." They left the mill as the sun began to drop behind the ridgeline. But as they stepped into the cold November air, none of them noticed what trailed behind their boots. Fine white dust clinging to their soles, falling like snow into the leaves. The stones had marked them. By the next morning, Cold Spring was no longer debating what to do with the mill. It had become unanimous. Burn it. The town gathered in the churchyard before dawn. 43 men and boys with torches, axes, and kerosene. Reverend Whitmore tried to speak, to plead for reason, but no one listened. "You pray for us if you want," one man muttered. "But we're done praying to that thing." Sheriff Whitlock was there too, rifle slung, jaw clenched. He didn't try to stop them. No one did. They reached the Berringer mill just as sunlight kissed the Hudson. The wheel was still turning, slow and deliberate, though the brook had frozen in the night. That should have been impossible. No thaw, no trickle, yet the wheel moved like it always had. Driven by something deeper than water, they surrounded the building. Poured kerosene along the base, stuffed rags into cracks between the logs. The air reeked of fuel and fear. Then someone asked, "Where's Otto?" Whitlock stepped forward. "Hasn't been seen in over a week." "And Frederick?" "Longer." That's when the noise started. From deep inside the mill, a scraping, thumping, dragging sound, mechanical, but not rhythmic. Something struggling or resisting. Then voices, low, layered, chanting. Several men backed away, visibly trembling. "They're still in there," one whispered. "They ain't alive," said another. But before they could ignite the flame, The front doors of the mill opened, slowly, silently. No one stood there, just darkness beyond the threshold, blacker than night, blacker than the grave. And the grinding started, louder than before, furious, hungry. The ground vibrated with it. One man dropped his torch and ran. Others followed, but 5 remained, Whitlock among them. He stepped into the doorway. Inside, the air churned with flour dust so thick it obscured his vision. The millstones turned faster than he'd ever seen, spinning with unnatural speed, shrieking now, not grinding, howling. And then he saw it. In the corner, wrapped in canvas, unmoving. A body, small, child-sized. Whitlock staggered backward. His mouth moved, but no words came. The torch dropped from his hand, flame flickering as it caught the kerosene. The last thing anyone saw before the fire rose was the runner stone splitting clean down the middle. Not from heat, but from within, like something had forced its way out. The fire burned for 2 days. Flames devoured the timber walls first, then the rafters, then the great wheel itself. Townsfolk stood at a distance, shielding their eyes as smoke poured into the sky like black steam from a ruptured engine. No one dared approach, not even the bravest, not even the sheriff. And yet the sound never stopped. Even as the flames reduced the mill to a skeletal frame, the grinding persisted, deep, resonant, impossible. Some said it echoed through the rocks themselves. Others heard it in their dreams that night. The rumble of stones chewing flesh, the faint click of hooks swinging from the rafters. By the 3rd morning, the fire had finally died. All that remained was a scorched foundation and the blackened arc of the broken water wheel, now still. The people of Cold Spring hoped that would be the end. They were wrong. That afternoon, a boy named Jesse Forrester wandered too close to the ruins while chasing a stray goat. He never came home. They found the goat 2 hours later, unharmed but covered in flour, its fur dusted white, its eyes wide and bloodshot. Jesse's shoes were found near the basement hatch, but there was no basement anymore. The fire had collapsed everything into the ground. Beams, stones, floors, and rooms. All of it gone. And yet, the hatch remained, still intact, still sealed, cold to the touch. The next night, Reverend Whitmore rang the church bell non-stop for 20 minutes, something he had never done in his 40 years of service. When the townsfolk gathered, they found him on his knees, trembling, clutching a scrap of burnt canvas. "There's a chamber beneath," he whispered. "Older than the mill, older than the town, built with no nails, no mortar. Just stone. It wasn't destroyed." "How do you know?" someone asked. "I saw it," he croaked. "In my dreams." The council convened. They debated sealing the site in cement, blasting it with powder, calling in the army. But in the end, they chose silence. The ruins were fenced off, marked as unstable, and declared off limits by county law. The sheriff posted guards for a time, but none stayed longer than a week. Strange sounds, strange dreams, and always the flower. Fine, white, clinging to clothes, hair, boots. Even when no one had walked near the mill for days, the people stopped speaking of it. But the valley never forgot, because the stones were never buried. By winter, Cold Spring had become a ghost of itself. The mill gone, the harvest unsold, and the roads too dangerous to travel after dusk. Families began packing up and leaving. The town's bakery shut down. Merchants closed shop. By Christmas, 1 in every 4 homes stood empty. Those who stayed lit lanterns all night and whispered prayers with mouths pressed to their children's foreheads. And still, the strange flower appeared, drifting in like mist, through cracks in windows and under doors. No one could explain it. The air would be clear 1 hour, and then, without a sound, fine dust would settle over the floorboards, over bookshelves, across dining tables. Always the same pale powder, always the same bitter smell. Some said it tasted faintly metallic. Some said it carried the tang of old blood. Sheriff Whitlock grew quiet, withdrawn, his beard untrimmed, eyes sunken. He kept the Berringer ledger under lock and key in the church basement, but he read it nightly, convinced the names meant something more. He began cross-referencing birth and death records from as far as Albany. And then one night, he found it. The last page of the ledger wasn't written by Otto or Frederick. It was older, different ink, faded, 5 names, all dated 1793. Each name belonged to a settler from the original river outpost that had stood on Breakneck Brook long before Cold Spring existed. None of those settlers had graves. Whitlock dug deeper. Records from Dutch traders, handwritten logs, and one French missionary's journal all mentioned the same rumor, that native peoples had called that bend in the brook the place that hungers, a site avoided for generations, a place where earth itself devoured offerings. The Berringers hadn't built the mill on cursed ground. They'd simply uncovered what had already been buried. That winter, Whitlock sent a letter to a friend at the State Archives in Albany, requesting geological surveys and historical records. The reply came 2 weeks later, rushed, unsigned, with one sentence circled in red ink. There is no natural stone in that region capable of turning itself. And yet, it had. He closed the letter and looked out the window of his office. Across the valley, in the moonlight, the ruins of the mill still stood, and rising from them, faint but clear, was the sound of grinding. Sheriff Whitlock began sleeping in his office, rifle beside his desk, a circle of salt laid around the room. He told no one. Even as Cold Spring emptied, families fleeing south to Peekskill or across the river to Fishkill Landing, he stayed. A few shopkeepers remained, and the Reverend too, but everyone moved as if watched, speaking softly, avoiding any mention of what had happened down at Breakneck Brook. And then the dreams began. Everyone had them, children and elders, women and men. They saw the mill, whole again, standing tall, not in ruin but pristine, the wheel turning, the stones clean, the air heavy with the scent of bread baking, and something beneath it, something iron, something wet. And in every dream, the same thing, voices whispering from the grinding room. The bones remember. Some awoke screaming, but hers whispered gibberish until their throats ran dry. Whitlock recorded what he could. 47 dreamers, 18 with fever, 3 who stopped speaking entirely. By late January, the Hudson froze over, and for 2 nights in a row, something walked across it. Tracks were found in the snow, deep, barefoot prints, yet too large to be human. No one dared follow them, though Whitlock did. For half a mile, he traced them across the ice, through the woods, and back to the ruins of the Berringer mill. There, in the snow beside the old foundation, he found a single object, a strip of hospital linen, stamped with the seal of the Middletown State Asylum, Frederick Berringer. Gone for nearly 3 months, declared dead after disappearing from the mill during the fire. And yet, here was his garment, torn and stiff with ice, and something else. The snow around the ruins had melted in a perfect circle, 30 feet wide, as if the ground itself radiated heat. Steam curled from the soil, and the air reeked of scorched grain and ash. The sheriff stared for a long time, his breath fogging, and then he heard it. Not the grinding this time, not the machinery, a child's giggle, high, sharp, echoing from deep beneath the ruins. He didn't run, he didn't shout. He simply whispered, "God help us," and dropped the salt ring into the fire. That night, the grinding returned louder than ever, and in the homes of Cold Spring the flour came in waves, coating everything, even the lungs. By February, Cold Spring was no longer a town. It was a waiting room for something worse. Only 30 residents remained. Most didn't speak. Those who did whispered of sounds beneath their floorboards, of flour oozing from the cracks in their ceilings, of dreams they could not wake from, and of the boy. He appeared just after sunset, standing at the crossroads near the cemetery, small, barefoot, hair matted with dust. His eyes were black, not just dark, black, as if someone had gouged the light from them. He didn't speak, just stood there, head tilted. Mrs. Murtaugh tried to take him in. She lasted until dawn. The next morning, her windows were shattered, every surface inside dusted white. Her body was never found, only her teeth, laid in a neat row on the kitchen table. After that, no one went near the boy again. He stayed near the mill ruins for days, then vanished. Some said he'd returned underground. Others believed he never existed, that he was something conjured from the bones beneath the stones. Sheriff Whitlock had stopped keeping official records. What was left to document? The town was dying, and the hunger beneath it had only grown. The stones were still, physically, but the sound of them echoed across the valley. And not just at night. Midday now brought the hum, like something powering up. One morning, Whitlock opened his door to find a sack of flour on his porch, neatly tied, sealed with wax. It bore no mark, no label, no footsteps in the snow. He burned it immediately. That night, the dreams returned. This time, they were not of the mill. They were of grinding rooms beneath it, deeper than any foundation, rooms lined with iron hooks and winches, pits filled with bones, sacks of hair, shelves of teeth sorted by size, and in the center of it all, a new machine, massive, turning, but not with water, with blood. Whitlock awoke screaming. His nose bled for hours. Abuse. Hen. He looked at his pillow. He found the indentation of something beneath it. A ring, his mother's wedding band. She died in Albany 10 years ago, buried in consecrated ground. How had it returned? More importantly, why did it smell like flour? And why, when he touched it, did the millstone inside him begin to turn? Sheriff Whitlock knew it would end with the mill. It always had. He packed his rifle, a lantern, a flask of whiskey, and the Berringer ledger, now brittle from overuse. He left a note pinned to the church door. Don't follow. Seal it when I'm gone. At dusk, he made his way down Breakneck Brook. Snow fell steadily, but the trail ahead was clear, as though something had already passed through, melting a path. The trees stood silent, branches bare, watching. The ruins waited. They hadn't collapsed entirely. Though charred and broken, the outer beams still jutted like ribs from blackened soil. And in the center, where the grinding room once stood, the ground had cracked open. A wide fissure, too symmetrical to be natural. He descended slowly, boots crunching ash and bone. Inside, he found a corridor, stone walls smoothed by hands or time. Lantern light flickered along its length, revealing carvings worn by centuries. Spirals, triangles, the same symbols etched into the ledger's final pages. He passed hooks hanging from chains, shelves stacked with numbered jars, locks, pulleys, belts of leather that pulsed like veins. And finally, the chamber. It stretched wider than the mill above had ever been, supported by stone arches far older than colonial hands could have built. In the center sat the machine, the final mill. Whitlock couldn't comprehend its shape, part gear, part altar, part maw. It turned not with water or steam, but by something unseen, something felt in the marrow. He approached it slowly. The stone underfoot grew warm, the air filled with the scent of scorched sugar and meat. As he stepped closer, the grinding stopped. Silence fell. Then the machine spoke, not aloud, but within him. It spoke with the voice of every name in the ledger, every missing soul, every child who'd vanished. It told him things no man should know, how long bone dust can leaven bread, how protein-rich flour ferments in the gut, how calcium binds with iron in the blood. And then it asked, "Will you feed us?" Whitlock fell to his knees, not in surrender, but in understanding, because it wasn't asking him to bring more. It was asking if he was enough. He opened the ledger one final time. The last page was blank, waiting. He dipped a finger in ash and wrote one word, Whitlock. Then he laid down beneath the stone, and the machine resumed its work. They found his rifle 3 days later, leaning against a tree near the ruins. No body, no footprints, just that same fine dust scattered in spirals across the snow like flour sifted from a great height. The townspeople said nothing. There was nothing left to say. By spring, Cold Spring had emptied completely. Homes boarded, doors nailed shut. The last to leave was Reverend Whitmore, who took the church bell with him and left the cross behind. He died in silence a year later, scribbling numbers on his bedsheets, gear ratios mostly, and the word feed over and over again. The site of the Berringer mill was purchased in 1860 by the state under quiet circumstances. Officially, it became a PEB, Protected Geological Preserve. But no signs were ever posted, no trails ever cleared, and when surveyors tried to chart the land, their compasses failed, their instruments jammed. Several refused to return. Later, someone planted trees over the ruins, fast-growing spruce, a symbolic burial. But locals knew. You could still hear it on fog-heavy nights, that low, grinding hum, drifting down Breakneck Brook, echoing from beneath the roots. They said the ground there never froze, that the snow never stuck, and that sometimes, near the tree line, you could see a boy, barefoot, dusted in white, watching, waiting. No one dared speak his name. In 1914, a group of builders broke ground on a small hydroelectric project downstream. They unearthed what they believed to be part of the original mill foundation. 3 days later, 2 workers were missing. A third was found babbling nonsense and bleeding from the mouth. The project was abandoned. The stone they uncovered still sits in the Cold Spring Historical Society basement. Few know what it is. Fewer still will touch it. On its underside, nearly eroded away, is a carving in the shape of a circle, spiraled inward, and in the center, barely visible, is a single word. Hungry. They say the mill still dreams, that the stone remembers every name, every weight, every scream, ground down into silence. It waits, silent beneath the soil, until someone comes close enough to hear the whisper again. The whisper that never changes. We feed, and one day, someone always does.